This is the way I grew up, man. Going to church every minute of Sunday. We got an awesome experience. For Worship is having another kind of worship gathering night in Newmarket. Moses is going to be there, and he's part of that leadership team that's going to make it happen. We're going to meet at a church called Newmarket Alliance Church, which is kind of cool because do you know what we're going to do right now? I was going to just give them the way you told me to say your name. I thought that was so funny that the Reverend Jonathan Gonyou, pastor of Newmarket Alliance Church, just so happens to be our speaker today as we're going to conclude our Outflow series where we are looking to say, God, what comes out of me? And then we're discovering that story, and part of that story, honestly, is all kinds of this left-hand lousiness came into my life. How did the right hand of grace and mercy come into that life, and what comes out of me now? That's what we've been asking people to do over the last number of weeks. Jonathan's going to do that for us today, but how cool is that it was, we have the opportunity to go to Newmarket Alliance tonight for Worship. Jonathan's here this morning. When somebody comes here to visit, it's an unfamiliar place. We like to try and make them feel welcome. Would you please help me to welcome the Reverend Jonathan Gonyou to our platform?
Thanks, brother. I got to tell you, I'm sorry, my bass playing brother. Okay. What an honor to be here. Thank you for having me. Right now around this very moment, I think, Newmarket Alliance Church is praying for a church in Stouffville called Into One, and they've just watched a video of Pastor Graham sort of giving the origin story of your church. Now, this was a video made by our denomination. Maybe some of you haven't even seen it, but Newmarket Alliance is watching it right now and just hearing about God at work in this God story that is Into One. I want to thank Graham for initiating a friendship that I think will last. And I knew there was sort of a connection, not just because we're Gen X, not because of earrings, not because we love a good burger. I didn't think there was a bigger U2 fan than me, and I'm thinking of my 16-year-old self thinking that someone snuck a U2 lyric into the name of the church. That would have blown my mind. I would have maybe called it Sunday Bloody Sunday Service or something like that. Now, I'm a little nervous about today, not because my story is vulnerable, which parts of it are. I'm a little nervous because I try to give a message that has a clear through line, that has an obvious point. And how many know that your story doesn't fit nicely into a 3-act structure? No, yeah, in fact, I hope my story isn't over. I hope, maybe some of the best lessons are yet to come. And yet I'm trusting God that whatever seemingly unrelated timeline or tangent I go off on, that there would be some nugget in there by God's grace for somebody. Maybe even something for everybody. I love this series that you're doing, of just really hearing about calling, about God's hand on people's lives. I was born in Peterborough in January of 1973. This is little baby me, I think, is coming up. Has there been a cuter kid? I don't think so. Oh, really? I'll arm wrestle you over that, but I still don't know anything about Peterborough, and yet it's a stone's throw away. I was born there because my dad had a profound encounter with Jesus, turned his life around. quit the grocery business to follow his call to ministry at the Pentecostal Bible College there. I've only known parents who were in ministry and who are now retired, and it's fair to say, you can ask Graham's kids afterwards, that there's pros and cons. And life as a pastor back then was even a little bit different. There were shorter stints in churches. In fact, my dad's, I think, unique call or burden was often following a pastor who had sinned or blown up the church. You have a district superintendent asking him to come and bring some healing and some stability. But what that meant was that by the time I was 14, I had moved 9 times. And so I never had this strong sense of roots. My first memory is being sexually touched by a babysitter. And to be honest, I don't know if it's a real memory. Was it a fever dream? I'm very cognizant of the idea of this phenomenon of false memories. I don't feel I've been traumatized or damaged in any way. The memory came to me as an adult. I asked my parents about various babysitters. They got a bit of a sickened look on their face as they immediately thought of someone. My sister, who is older than me, she's going to come up after this slide, she started therapy this year and was asked to remember her first memory of fear. And it was of a babysitter, a female babysitter. And she has a lot more details in her memory being older. And so we started talking, piecing things together. I only bring this up because I know one's earliest memories can have an oversized impact. The first few memories of your life, even if I'm not entirely sure how or even if it affected me, it's not the happiest way to start a story, but I share it partly because if the statistics are true, there are several in this room right now who can relate in some way, except probably for a much more traumatic, more painful memory. And I want to say that I'm so sorry, and that you're not alone, and that while the time and place to share these things might not always be from a pulpit, I still believe the church ought to be the safest place in the world for radical honesty, for authenticity, where you can be known and know others deeply, love and be loved without strings attached. One of the hardest things, or I shouldn't say hardest, one of the things about being an old school PK was something called parsonages. Now, just skip ahead a little bit. I'm standing here on, the house, or the church that was right next door to my house, and only separated by a parking lot. I lived in a parsonage until I was 13, and if things weren't complicated enough to sort of separate ministry life from home life, that kind of made it harder. It's not all bad memories. I can remember a parsonage in Kingston on a hot summer day, and my dad filling the baptism tank so that we could go for a swim. There's got to be some perks, I think. Sometime around the age of 5 years old, here's this kid raised in the church, kept hearing these Christianese terms, washed in the blood. And, some of you may remember the story of Nicodemus, who would meet Jesus late at night and ask him questions. And Jesus said, "You must be born again." And Nicodemus was like, what does that even mean? I can't go back in my mother's womb. And so here I am, this 5-year-old kid, hearing these terms, climbing up on my dad's lap and going, "Dad, how do you be born again?" I mean, talk about lobbing him a softball, eh? Like, what a great moment for any dad, I imagine, as he led me to Christ. Now, we might want to diminish the salvation story of a 5-year-old. Obviously my understanding at that age was very limited. I'm told that it actually made a real difference a behavioral difference. I guess I had been a bit of a holy terror leading up to that. And I discovered early on that there was a bit of a performance side to me. Mr. Cowboy Jonathan. I could make people laugh and get on stage and say precocious things and charm adults. My parents would literally bring me out in front of guests to do my imitations, which were really imitations, doing people that I didn't even know who they were. Richard Nixon, Mae West. Then in grade 5, I was the county speech champion of Essex County, sort of a strange set of trophies when your friends were getting hockey and soccer medals. But I imagine there can be an ugly side to that performance mentality that I'm not proud of. It can be a dark side of a legitimate gifting. Thinking about my story, I've recalled some specific seasons where I felt a profound closeness to Christ, even at a young age, living in this idyllic little town of Exeter, Ontario, with a great community, a great church. And I remember my dad one time called the men of the church to get up early for a week and just pray. And I wanted to be part of that. I said, Dad, make sure and wake me up. And he comes into my room at 5:45 in the morning and sees little Jonathan sleeping. He just didn't have the heart to wake him up. He didn't maybe think I was serious. And so we went to the church. And I woke up a little bit later and saw Dad had left. And I got on my bike and rode to the church. And remember these men praying and my dad looking over. And there's his little 8-year-old son just praying. Those are stories of a sincere, if childlike, but a sincere faith. I grew up seeing miracles and healings and lots of people coming to Christ. I think of all those moves, though, and it would always be a rough start. The new kid trying to find his way. I'm almost always. I'd start with a group of, a group of outcasts. And then in a little time, maybe the popular kids could see I could make them laugh or something, and I'd get promoted socially and start the cycle over again in a new town. Every now and then when I see someone come to church alone for the first time, as maybe some of you are here today, I just have so much respect for that, because I have those first day of school feelings immediately that sort of come in my gut. And I love my dad. He's going to show up here, the sermonator. Easily the most significant person in my life. I'll be honest, we didn't do a ton of things together. He wasn't a sports guy. We didn't fix things together, didn't throw the ball around. Though he likes movies, I like movies. One of my good memories is him at a young age taking me to a highly inappropriate Mel Brooks film festival, Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein. And sometimes he'll apologize that the church took so much time away from family. And I try to assure him, nah, you were a great dad, blah, blah, blah. But he probably did give the church the best of his time. I have mixed feelings about it to this day. I can argue both sides. I mostly don't want him to live his final years in guilt. He's had a tremendous impact over the years. People who still call him their pastor after 50 years. I do wonder at what cost sometimes. So another move, another rough start, another promotion in social status. When I look back on the last city that I lived in Hamilton, before we moved to Alberta, and I remember some of the best friends I ever had. There's the last line of the movie Stand By Me. This was something like, you'll never have friends like the ones you had when you were 13. And that was true for me. Amazing teachers. Any teachers in the room? Thank you, thank you. I just had profound, like you're lucky sometimes to have one teacher who makes a difference, who has a special interest in you. I had like 3 in that one junior high school, and then we moved out to Alberta right when I was starting high school. Same pattern, starting as a bit of an outsider, being recruited by the cool kids. Actually, I think I was able to transcend groups. My people were really the drama punk musician types, but the popular jocks and cheerleaders and different, the skaters and the metalheads and all invited me in. And I had a foot in the Christian crowd. And talk about a performing aspect of me that I'm not proud of. As you can imagine, the jocks and cheerleader crowd were championship level drinkers. And the musician punk types were getting high. And then there would be youth on Friday nights. And I don't remember a conscious decision to dip my toe in experimentation. I justified it once. It got easier to progressively justify. I'm getting high in high school. Maybe I thought that's what high school meant, to get. I'm getting into bars and clubs because I can grow facial hair since I was 15. I stole a pair of non-prescription glasses to make me look older so that I could buy booze. I think God has a sense of humor because I have to wear real glasses now. But in fairness, the first time I ever had seen drugs was my first night in the Alberta youth group, where someone offered me mushrooms in the bathroom. And my first thought is, like button cap, or I didn't even understand. I was so naive. Now here I am a year or 2 later. I was the guy going to youth and then sneaking out to get high at a friend's. I would sit at Boston Pizza smoking. Young people, you could go to any restaurant and smoke. Did you know that? They had, in everywhere you went, there was a non-smoking section and a smoking section, which really, until people realized that every section was a smoking section. You could smoke on an airplane, my goodness. Anyways, I'd sit there facing the entrance of the restaurant just in case any elders came in or youth leaders. I did get caught. I remember going to one of those New Year's Eve church services and then sneaking out to get high at a party. And there I am with that, joint up to my lips, and I look, and there's another guy from my youth, like a deer caught in the headlights, staring each other down like a Mexican standoff, and we just start laughing. What else could we do? We'd been caught by each other. I never denied God, never felt like I turned my back on him, but I was really living a compartmentalized life. I see it now in adults, and I hate it because I hated it in myself. I was the PK going to youth and 2 Sunday services and Sunday school and writing songs and singing them in church as a teenager, while all this other stuff is going on, including lying to my parents daily. In grade 12, I had a heartbreak. I had a growing sense of hypocrisy, of cognitive dissonance, of emptiness. I had a legitimate come to Jesus moment, an altar call experience, maybe at an altar, something like this, where I practically ran down the aisle. I felt something pulling me to get right with God. Now, ironically, shortly after, a girl in our youth group, trying to divert the heat from her own rebellious indiscretions, told her parents the rumors about Jonathan Gonyou, the drugs, the partying, and her parents told my parents. It's really humbling to make your mother cry. Oh yeah, there she is. And my parents forgave me, and they said they'd never bring it up again, and they never did. They may have missed their son's rebellion because of their investment in the church, but I'll say this: they were never different people between church and home. Unlike me, Dad never had a fake preacher voice with every head bowed and every eye closed. I witnessed them daily, faithfully, praying, reading the Bible, worshiping, working things out as a couple. Dad even defended the earrings that he personally hated, but as balanced as he was, we were still part of a Pentecostal culture that sometimes drifted into some strange leanings, insistence on tongues as a proof of the Holy Spirit in you. Turn or burn events, we'd call them, like Heaven's Gates and Hell's Flames, cringy worship experiences. It was easy for a cynical guy to get a little more cynical. And so when someone would ask, which would happen a fair bit, if I was going to follow in my dad's footsteps, I was an adamant, not on your life. And maybe a few swear words thrown in there too. My folks got called back to Ontario when I was 18 years old, and I wasn't going to come back with them. They say they cried all the way to Saskatchewan, but I was done following them around the country in Alberta, had really felt like home. And so a tree planting summer really segued into this Christian team, them becoming my roommates in Edmonton. Young person today, if you are still under your parents' roof, there will come a time where you have this existential choice, really. Are you going to sort of ride your parents' coattails of their faith, or are you going to make it something your own, or are you just going to drift away entirely? You may even come to some slightly different conclusions than how you were raised, but unfortunately it is becoming a cliche that young adults, as they leave home, would also leave the faith of their upbringing. And I want you to know that God doesn't want some vicarious relationship wherein your parents are some sort of go-between, some sort of mediator. He wants a growing, vital relationship with you. And by God's grace, as my faith became my own, it became exciting as well. I studied to become a youth counselor, working with teens who, for various reasons, had to be taken out of the home. There's my graduating class, and then here's some pictures of those sort of difficult. Oh, wait, no, sorry, back. I would have other roomies throughout the years as a young adult, and they were always Christians, and we would study the Bible together or have young adults gather in our house. I became really interested in apologetics and theology. During this time, I was asked to join a band. Still embarrassed about the name, so I will not say it. We got to go to Nashville for a month and record with our heroes, who were called the Choir, and got our CD distributed across Canada. Some radio play. Canada's biggest Christian band at the time. I mean, talk about a big fish in a little pond. They were called Hocus Pick, and they asked us to tour all of Canada and the States, about 60 cities over 2 tours. And there's even a guy in our church in Newmarket who's become a friend who saw us in Nova Scotia and connected the dots. And I'd say, there were nights we'd play for 8 people and nights we'd play for 2,000. And I got to fulfill some dreams. I also think I came to the realization that the the rock and roll lifestyle isn't all it's cracked up to be. The hocus pick wives were supporting them financially. We were sleeping stacked 3 high did you have that bus picture? Oh my, that was our tour bus. And, we rely on the subs and pizza that every venue provided for us. We were breaking even if we were lucky. I realized I was maybe a bit more of a homebody, liked my bed more than I liked the adventure of being on a road. But I am grateful for 1,000 reasons. First of all, those relationships. Those guys in the band ended up becoming my groomsmen. Getting it out of my system, quite frankly. I didn't know it at the time, but this ended up being training for becoming a worship pastor, for becoming a youth pastor, ministry in general. Some venues were churches, and they'd want a mini sermon or devotional, and then all the guys in my band would turn their head to me, and in retrospect, this was all providential. In fact, that is really the key word that I keep coming back to as I thought about my story this week. I've had the pleasure in looking back, and providence, seeing the hand of God, who has a good plan for my life, who redeems our mistakes, seeing him directing me, building in me experiences that would later be used for my good and his glory. I became a youth counselor. Frankly, I wasn't a lot older than some of the kids who I worked with in residential care. I came to that treatment center nervous on my first day, locked my keys in the car, and these kids who had experience in the juvenile system, they got a couple things from, a spatula, and they got in my car in about 45 seconds anyways. So I worked with good, dedicated people, but it was hard. It was hard. I was hit, spit on. I had to cut a girl down from hanging. Restrained kids, had a heart for them, and I left with a heart for them. I could also see the ineffectiveness of the system, in that we were treating kids who were only a byproduct of their home. Meanwhile, their parents aren't being, treated, if you will. How we were institutionalizing kids and not providing them, with real solutions to their problems. I also saw kind of the dead eyes of my co-workers who'd been there 25, 30 years, sort of hanging on until pension, it felt like. And as I started my first career, I also met Victoria, who had moved back from Texas. I guess all my exes don't live in Texas. They moved to Canada. She was best friends with my dear high school church friend, Tisha. And now Tisha had married my best friend, my tree planter friend, John. So here I am, always hanging out with my 2 best friends, like a third wheel. And then Vicky comes along, and now it's the 4 of us. And if I'm being totally honest, I'm embarrassed to say this. I think for the first time, I considered her ineligible as a serious relationship. Vicky had had a teen pregnancy and a child she gave up for adoption. And, I hope you can see the irony in that, the immaturity. Obviously, I hadn't exactly been a Christian model of maturity, but this seemed emotionally complex for me, or more to the point, not how I had pictured a bride to be. I'm grateful God had another plan in spite of my immaturity. We dated for 6 months. We were engaged for 5 months. Not necessarily the road I would, advocate for my own kids, but boy, it sure has worked out. And even though I perceived a little resistance from her parents before I'd even met them, because they're in the States, they sent Vicky Anybody remember Dr. Laura, the radio host? They sent her the book, 10 Stupid Things Women Do to Mess Up Their Lives, with with underlined passages about marrying too soon. Subtle. We were living in a 3-bedroom condo in Edmonton that I got for $58,000. I can't believe how much has changed. We had a great social circle, a great church. Life was great. I'm not sure either of us had the wisdom about how to address the fact that this child that Vicky gave birth to, Kelsey, even though she wasn't in our home, she was inextricably part of our lives on some level. And I know my approach of sweeping it under the carpet was selfish. It wasn't honoring to Vicky. And there would be tension over the first few years about who she could tell. Should we have pictures of Kelsey visible in our home? How involved we would be in the future. I'm so grateful to say that time and maturing and just being secure in each other's love makes all the difference. And I have zero weird feelings about a beautiful Kelsey. In fact, I think Kelsey there she's grown up with her own child. And if I had the time, I would share with you even her adoption story, which is just a God story, landing up with Christian parents who I knew from my dad's old church. Anyways, it's just God's fingerprints all over it. And around this time, Vicky and I started to get excited about church things, the vision of our community at Stony Plain Alliance Church, and we became youth leaders and worship leaders, and shocker of all shockers, I was asked to be an elder at 25 years old, asked to preach. And in that time, we went through all kinds of leadership challenges, staff moral failings, pockets of heretical teaching, our senior pastor resigning and us looking for a new leader. I didn't realize that at the time. Oh man, this was leadership training school. And while this is going on, I'm taking correspondence theology courses. Why? I loved it. I was enjoying it. Again, not a coincidence in retrospect. Then I remember, clear as day, going for a walk to get the mail, and some word of God came to me. Maybe you're familiar with the term, a rhema word, a specific word for me at this moment. And folks, this doesn't happen to me on the reg, okay? I'm not one of those guys who's like, and then God said to me, and then I said back, and then God retorted, and But I know God speaks in 2026. But for me at least, these are rare and precious things. In fact, the word wasn't exactly specific. I just came back from that walk and I told Vicky, I don't know what this means, but I think we need to prepare ourselves for a change, some sort of call to vocational ministry. Well, not long after that, not through any initiative or job search of my own, I got a call to be a youth pastor in Chatham, Ontario, a church who was looking for someone not necessarily who had come through the seminary track, but who had had real world youth experience. It was like they were customizing this job description for me. Providence. I think in that first year where I was a newbie, didn't have a ton of experience, but a lot of passion, God gave us bountiful spiritual fruit. All kinds of kids got saved. The youth group went from 12 to 90. It turned out there are churches out there that are ripe for harvest because all kinds of people have never actually been presented with the gospel. And I actually believe that fruitfulness in that first year was a gift from God to encourage me, because maybe if I'd known how hard it would be, I might not have stayed. I love those kids. They loved us. And yet there was a deep-seated dysfunction in that place. People couldn't agree on anything. And because of a congregational governance, they had a vote on the paint color of the walls and everything in between. Is that me? I keep moving this beautiful church, seated about 1,100, had a $500,000 organ in 1980s dollars. It was beautiful. But I guess that organ, it physically represented the division in the church between the supporters of traditional liturgical worship and those who wanted to be part of the modern worship movement. And behind that pipe organ was an intricate panel of wires and chips and processors. And somebody took acid and poured it all over that wiring. And, just sort of a tangible example of church division gone really bad. And we look back on that time as difficult relationally, except for in youth, difficult in a ministry sense. And even though I had kind of pulled a bait and switch on Vicky, remember, she didn't marry a pastor. She was married to one now. And we really learned to become a team, to trust each other, to rely on God. We had to. Vicky is really her own person. And in fact, she's leading worship right now in Newmarket. That's why she's not with me today. But while she doesn't fit the mold, maybe, of a typical pastor's wife, whatever that conjures up for you, she's been such an invaluable partner in all of this. If there's a takeaway from this, I'll say this to the young people: marry well. Marry well. We sort of had this 5-year plan for starting a family, and wouldn't you know it, it was almost 5 years when we found out Vicky was expecting. Our first, what do you call it, ultrasound? I went to, and they asked me to just wait outside for a minute, and then I came in, and Vicky had this sheepish look on her face, and she points to the ultrasound screen, and she says, "What do you see?" And I'm like, have you ever seen one of these things? It's like, I don't know, it looks like there's a storm coming in from the East Coast. She says, "No, there's 2 heads." And for a second I thought, my baby has 2 heads? What? But we had these beautiful twin girls, Rosa and Leela, and almost exactly a year later, our surprise 3rd baby, Irish triplets, I think it's called. And her name is Gracie. Sometimes we still call her 3rd baby to this day. We were wiped physically from lack of sleep. I remember just being so happy with these girls. I used to love going out with that 3-seated monster stroller and just get all this love and attention, not for me, but for these girls who I just was so proud of. Now, years ago, in my early 20s, lots of tangents here, but I went to see a doctor about issues of depression. He was an old school guy, and this was a different time, and basically said, "It'll blow over, pull up your bootstraps," that sort of thing. Precisely the kind of message that minimized what I was feeling, and it made me think, yeah, put on your big boy pants, Jonathan. So I didn't revisit the idea until I was 30. And Victoria encouraged me to see her family doctor. And that doctor took it seriously and referred me to the right people. And I was diagnosed with something that I secretly suspected for years, a clinical depression. Medication was helping. But maybe in a prideful way, I didn't want to be saddled with a label for my life. So I would wrongly go on and off these meds, you know. I'd feel fine for a spell, yeah, because the meds were working, but then I'd see some 60-minute story about how antidepressants have the same effect as placebos or whatever, and I'd quit them cold turkey. And so now here I was, pastoring back in Alberta. Quick story, before Chatham, my last contribution as an elder was helping hire the new senior pastor there. And even though we moved away as he's moving into town, we had a chemistry, and we kept contact with each other. And one day, he called me saying they were looking for a worship pastor in Edmonton, and that's a real Alberta outfit right there. And he asked me to be worship pastor, which in retrospect was such a good fit. And not only that, but here I was coming to the church where I had gotten excited about the Lord, where Vicky had come to Christ, where we got married, where the best friends of our life were, and so we were thrilled. But the depression came back. Started seeing a psychologist and read all the books she recommended, did all the homework that she assigned. She was really helpful in our marriage. But I was experiencing irrational anger. I had been off the meds. I was in a bad state. I was very close to getting in several fights in the community. I was a pastor ready to either kick some butt or get my butt kicked. Embarrassing in retrospect. Anger turns inward, and it becomes depression. And it's the worst I've experienced, completely unrelated to circumstances. And I couldn't face people, and I would start crying for no reason. I had thoughts of wanting to die. And during that time, especially, Victoria was such a caregiver and support. I'll always be thankful for her kindness. I think the most important thing my psychologist said to me was in our last session. She said, "Jonathan, you've done everything I've asked you to do. You've done good work here. You're implementing some of the tools we've discussed. But the fact of the matter is some people's brains don't produce enough serotonin. And it's not your fault. And there's nothing you can do to sort of muster it up. You need medicine." And there was a real weight, I think, that lifted just hearing that from a Christian professional who I respected. So I'm not thrilled to be on meds. It's still something I pray for healing for. Sometimes I wonder if I passed on a bit of my crazy to our youngest Gracie, who has had mental health struggles, has been maybe 90% of our parental tears and prayers. In the same way that I wondered if I had inherited something from my legitimately crazy Uncle Ken. But I worry less about it these days. I believe God is good. And even as a baby, I told Victoria, I think there's something special about Gracie and something special in store for her. One of the gifts that has, isn't she cute? Come on. One of the gifts that has come out of it has been sharing my struggle in church. And the people who come out of the woodwork and talk to me and say they've never told anyone about their depression. Folks, do you realize that the things you've gone through, that divorce, that miscarriage, that death of a loved one, the mistakes you've made, that jail time, that addiction, every kind of sin, do you believe that God, in his kindness and mercy, can actually use those things? I don't believe he ever causes them, but he won't waste them. And he won't, what he can do is actually cause you to be a minister to others in ways that I could never be, or Graham could ever be, because your story is unique. And those hard things that you've experienced gives you credibility to minister to others if you allow yourself to be vulnerable, open, allow yourself to be used by God. I still pray that God would heal me of these mental health issues. But like Graham said in the video that the church is watching right now, as he referred to the 3 men in the fire, I know that my God will deliver me. But even if he doesn't, I will still praise him. He's still my God. When I was a youth pastor, I thought, I'm always going to be a youth pastor. I'll be one of those 50-year-old guys doing all-night laser tag. I thought that until a combination of God's stirring and open doors moved me into this associate role as a worship pastor. I thought, I'm going to do this forever. Until, I don't know how else to put it, I felt a growing capacity, a leadership capacity for more. I felt it was time to lead a church. This church came up in Newmarket that seemed like maybe a fit. They seemed the right mix of irreverence and authenticity and creativity, important characteristics to me. I told Vicky about this church. She said something like, well, I hope you enjoy Newmarket, but I'm quite content here. But we committed to at least pray, and thought there couldn't be any harm in that. And she even agreed to have an interview over Zoom with me and the elders from Newmarket. It's kind of freeing, actually, when your wife doesn't want the job and you both can just say whatever you want, the truth, even. And after that interview over Zoom, I looked over at Vicky, and she has these tears in her eyes, and she says, those are our people. And the following Sunday in church, she watched me in a new light as God whispered to her, he's ready. So as a PK growing up, when my dad called a family meeting, it went something like this. How do you kids feel about this town that we are definitely moving to? Does it matter how I feel about it? But with my own kids, I don't know, some of you will get this reference. I don't know if I was, what did Gideon leave out? Sorry, a fleece. I don't know if I was leaving out a fleece, testing God. But I said, if this is going to work, my kids have to be behind this. The twins had just started high school. Maybe the biggest miracle of this story is that having 3 teenage girls, well-connected socially, not remembering having lived any other place than Alberta, didn't say, yeah, I guess so, but we're actually excited about moving. Providence. I'm going to close, finally. There's no dramatic conclusion. My time here at Newmarket has been over 8 years. It's been amazing. It's been hard. I spent a couple hours with the police yesterday because of somebody making threats against a congregational member. It's messy. And I think I may have naively thought that the trajectory of one's life is sort of like up and to the right, you know? If you could scale it on a graph, that would be what it would look like. And you know, it looks something more like this. And it's a mess of a graph. But what I found is that pattern is very much the fingerprint of God on my story and on the story of my family. And I want you to know he's writing a story on you as well. It doesn't look like this, it looks like this. But see it as the fingerprint of God on your life. Let me pray for you. God, I thank you for these good people. And whether they know it or not, you have a good plan for their life. I thank you, Lord, that things that they're experiencing that even seem hard, the things we hold in our left hand, you are such a good God. In your kindness, Lord, you are going to redeem those things. You're even going to use it for your glory and their good. And they're going to become mature, sanctified through the story that you're writing in their life. God, encourage your people today. May they know that even whatever crossroads they're at today, that they'll be able to look back and say, oh, providence. God was part of that, and I didn't see it. Like Jacob with the ladder going up to heaven. Oh, God was surely in this place, and I didn't even know it. That's what's happening in the stories of the lives of these good people. And all God's people said, Amen. Bless you.